Welcome to Mintel's Little Conversation podcast.
Welcome to Mintel's Little Conversation, where our experts bring you fresh ideas and new perspectives on how consumers eat, drink, shop, groom and think. I'm Andrew McDougall, Director of Beauty and Personal Care Research at Mintel, and today I'm going to be discussing non-fungible tokens, or NFTs, and sort of the digital world that exists in. And I'm really excited as well to be joined by two of my esteemed colleagues in America. First up, we have Brittany Steger, who's a Senior Analyst for Retail and E-commerce. Welcome to the podcast, Brittany.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm happy to be here.
Happy to have you. Very happy to have you. And I'm also very happy as well to welcome Sydney Reber as well, who's the Associate Analyst of Food and Drink and Food Service as well. So welcome, Sydney.
Thanks, Andrew. Good to be here.
So I guess the starting point, I'm really excited to get going on this with you, because I know that the two of you have looked in your particular industries and things at sort of NFTs, as I say, non-fungible tokens, which we will refer to as NFTs from now on going forward. And I know you've written about them or spoken about them in the past. I'm really excited to hear your views on this. I guess the best thing to do, though, to probably start with is maybe for those people maybe listening that are thinking, what are you talking about? Maybe a quick introduction into what an NFT is for anyone tuning in. So I don't know if anyone has a sort of a concise example or a concise explanation they wanted to give.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll get started, but also kind of before we dive in, just really understanding, starting from a place that we recognize that these Web3 technologies are all new. So this is an evolving space that is still being built, and we're all learning together. So I think that's really important for listeners to keep in mind as we break through some of these new terminologies. I find that there's many layers to understanding NFTs or the metaverse, and that when you peel back one layer, people tend to come up with more questions. And so that's totally okay. We're all in this together. So to answer your question, what is an NFT? Obviously, NFT stands for non-fungible token. But what does non-fungible really mean, right? So non-fungible basically means that an asset is unique and cannot be replaced with anything else. In terms of what is an NFT, it's usually a unique digital asset that's tied to a blockchain. That is how we've defined it in some of our reports. It can be anything like digital media, whether that's artwork, a JPEG file. It can be a moment, a virtual pair of sneakers. NBA Top Shot is a really great example of NFTs where users have the opportunity to buy a clip from a portion of a game that they're really excited about. There's one user who purchased Jack Dorsey's first tweet from Twitter. So that it can really encapsulate many things, but the true cornerstone of an NFT is its uniqueness.
Yeah, it's really interesting you said that you mentioned the purchase of Jack Dorsey's tweet as well, because that's probably a good example of when people think of NFT, and a good example of that explanation of being non-fungible, because that tweet, I think I read somewhere they were trying to sell it and they can't get anywhere near the price they were expecting or that they bought it from. And I guess that just shows the fluctuating nature of, it's like an investment. It's a stock, it's a share, it's like a piece of art. There's no specific price. It's just obviously what is there. So it's really interesting to sort of see how brands play in that space.
Absolutely. I kind of think of NFTs like the digital equivalent of the Mona Lisa. So you have many, many copies of the Mona Lisa on posters and postcards everywhere, but there can only ever be one original Mona Lisa, right?
Yeah, I like to think of them as just a one-of-a-kind trading card. That would probably be the most tangible real-world example I could give. Something like that tweet. Everyone has access to read the tweet, to have it on their screen, but to have the rights to that tweet is kind of just in a world of the hype. It's something that people like.
And I think that's the interesting thing, because I think when you're, I'm always fascinated by the Maya principle by Raymond Loewy, who says most advanced yet acceptable. This idea that we can have the most advanced thing, but it kind of needs to be a bit familiar. We need to be able to connect with it. And I guess for NFTs, that is essentially what you've both mentioned there, sort of artwork and trading cards. It's almost like those are almost the tangible things that we can perceive in our mind. They're the familiar things that we can connect with to think, if we think of an NFT like that, it might be a little bit easy to understand this idea of ownership around the NFT and owning the original, I guess, which is what the clamor is all about.
Yeah, I think it does have to have roots in a real world, tangible example. I think that's where we are right now, combining the digital and physical worlds. So I think that's why the art collectibles have been, kind of the front runner and the introduction to NFTs in this space.
And so what would the two of you say then, I'm going to put you on the spot here, but what would you say makes an NFT valuable? Like right now, as we see it right now, as you say, it's going to evolve into something more, and we will take a look at that a little bit later. But what would you say right now, what is making NFTs valuable for people? What is that sort of, why is there this clamor? When they do a drop on any of these NFT platforms, they seem to go in seconds, particularly if you're, the comic book world or cartoons and things like that. So what is the sort of the value behind NFTs right now?
I think firstly, it's exclusivity. The one of a kind makes people want to grab them up as soon as possible. To be able to showcase that you have an exclusive piece, in whether you're in the third web and in a metaverse world, you can showcase that, whether you're tweeting about, getting one of 100 NFTs. I think that's the beginning of why people are so interested, is the exclusivity.
Yep. And to add on to that, the community is also a big value point for NFT owners. A lot of NFT releases include exclusive perks like VIP membership to a specific event or a restaurant, or exclusive parties for retailers that might look like special discounts, and also access to more extended networks on social media and in person. But really, as Sydney said, the true dollar value of an NFT is typically tied to its uniqueness or its rarity. So you might have ones that are more common, that have a lower floor, that are more, purchased by mainstream purchasers. And then you have your more rare NFTs for which there's only one or a few that are going for really high dollar amounts that are really, approached by investor types and things of that nature.
Yeah, it's interesting what you both said there, because in the beauty space right now, we see that is the way NFTs are being used. So you have, there's been a number of beauty companies that have jumped on board with their own NFTs. They link them to product purchases or limited editions of products. ELF Cosmetics famously had their NFT, which linked to the gold dipped hero products. And I think they sold just 9 of them. But again, there was that exclusivity around the physical product, owning the physical product, but also getting the NFT kind of version of that as well. So it's really interesting to see how that sort of playing out. Do you think that's where the strength of the NFT is right now? That's where the market is right now, is we need to be having these links. It's not just a case of just buying and owning an NFT. You need to have these links. Or do you think sort of the ownership on its own, this idea of exclusivity, it is enough right now to sort of pique consumer interest?
I think you certainly have to have a link to the real world, especially if you want to engage a general public. The exclusivity can only go so far, I think, with people being able to afford these things. So I think what you're seeing brands start to do is, like Brittany was saying, link them to discounts, link them to special events. NFTs in food service, there'll be special bar events where you can, buy an NFT cocktail and then go to the bar when they're only open to NFT owners and try new things. So I think it really does have to be in both worlds if you want to engage people outside of just a monetary experience.
Yeah, absolutely. We're sort of evolving past that initial early adopter hype buzz period where it was really drawing in those investor types. And I think that the big opportunity for brands and retailers is to really make NFTs accessible, but yet something that still has an era of exclusivity around it. Like one of my favorite NFT drops that I wrote about was American Eagle, who dropped a limited release of NFTs there's like 125 NFTs for $1 each. And the whole point of the project was to get younger, particularly Gen Z consumers interested and excited about NFTs and allow them to sort of have that first experience with it. That also included pairing the NFT with a physical item. So there was a patch that was a version of the NFT that they could sew onto their jeans, that just really tied into these concepts of identity, but also made them feel like they were getting really something special without having to put a lot of money up front into the purchase.
And that's really interesting as well. Because this idea, I think about this because, as you say, it's just one part of this wider step into sort of metaverses and things like that, and those types of new technologies. And it is this idea of, right now anyway, the strength is going to be in connecting to a tangible or a physical asset, as well as obviously this exclusivity being important. But I guess another sort of step as well into this metaverse and these sort of different technologies is then that connection, or is there indeed the connection between NFTs and crypto? Is NFTs going to potentially open up the option of crypto or the education of crypto for certain people? I mean, do users need to buy, or do they need to have crypto to buy NFTs? Is there going to be a link, do you think, between these spaces as well?
Generally, NFTs are purchased with crypto, at least in my experience and research, which can be a deterrent to some people who don't trust that type of technology. But really, a lot of these things do require you to have a crypto wallet, which can really be as basic as you want it to be. But it's just kind of educating yourself as far as the different types of crypto. I think most NFTs are done with Ethereum, sold and resold on spaces like OpenSea. I did, though, just read an insight. There is a payment service called MoonPay that kind of works as the middle person. So if people aren't comfortable using crypto but want to buy an NFT, they take out the crypto part. You can use your credit card. They just charge you a service fee. But I think in general, you really probably 95% of the time are going to be having to use crypto with NFTs.
And especially building on that, like the whole idea of an NFT being unique is really tied to the blockchain and the ability to authenticate and verify that an NFT is unique. And that's really where a lot of that emphasis on cryptocurrency and crypto wallets comes from, is the need to authenticate the purchase as a unique asset.
And I guess that kind of opens, you mentioned sort of authenticity and authenticating the NFTs and things. It brings us into, there are obstacles, obviously there are challenges for this particular space. And I think one of those things that you keep reading about is people stealing NFTs and things like that. Is that something that it's just par for the course right now, that we're always going to have that with technology? Or is that something that is off-putting enough for consumers? Is it a concern for any brands thinking about going into the space? Is it something that is going to be too off-putting, or is it something that is being dealt with and can be overcome?
Yeah, there was certainly a recent big story coming out of Bored Ape Yacht Club, which is a very well-known, probably one of the most well-known NFT collections, where there was a hack to their Discord and there was a loss of digital assets and ETH, or Ethereum currency. I think this is something that consumers are concerned about. I think it's something that players in this space are also concerned about taking action on. Authentication is certainly an issue. There's some counterfeit NFTs that have been going on. And so I think this comes back to the idea that this space is still evolving. And I think this is a big piece of the puzzle that people are still figuring out.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's inevitable in any type of new technology that there's going to be breaches. The fact that this involves so much money, I think, is going to be a deterrent to some people, probably the same people who already had reservations about entering this space. Really the appeal to a lot of people was that it's unregulated. So it's hard to balance putting your investments into a space like this, and then when something does go wrong, wanting this, more traditional business response of getting your money back. And I think that's kind of a big kink that needs to be worked out.
It's an interesting thing. You mentioned the word regulate there, and obviously I hadn't even mentioned that to begin with, but it is obviously for blockchain technologies in general, the benefit or the attraction to them is the sort of the decentralization of everything. However, I was also reading that looking ahead, we may see that governments are actually going to look to regulate NFT markets. I know that whenever we talk about cryptocurrencies as well, it's something that it's a question that normally crops up, this idea that it is going to need some sort of regulation, starting, for governments, for example, with NFTs, they can treat them as commodities that can be taxed. Of course, way to make money on them. So I guess any brands or any companies or anyone thinking of sort of getting into the space, whether it's NFT or crypto, we do need to stay up to date on regulations. But do you think that's a conversation that's got legs? Do you think it's a conversation that has to happen, or does it sort of destabilize the whole conversation anyway, because it was built around this idea that it wasn't regulated or centralized? Sorry. So is it Sophie's choice, or are we kind of in a difficult spot with it, or how do you think that's going?
I think we don't know how it's going to play out yet, is my answer to that. It's certainly a complex topic. And to Sydney's point, a lot of the benefit for people buying into cryptocurrency and NFTs is the fact that it cuts out the middleman and it is not regulated. But at the same time, as the metaverse grows, as the NFT market grows, as cryptocurrency grows and becomes more mainstream, I can't see a world where at some point there's not some sort of intervention on that front.
Yeah, I think brands really will enter the space regardless. I think the unregulated aspect of it was maybe more for personal investors. At this point, if you're not entering the metaverse as a brand and you're a bigger name, you're definitely missing out on many opportunities. So I think it might, it's going to upset people who are basing their personal wealth around it. But I think as far as brands go, they shouldn't use that as a deterrent into entering the space or continuing into the space.
And from because I know both of you work, as I mentioned at the start, very different fields that you work in. But from what you've seen in sort of some of the reports and the consumer research you've been looking into, how do you feel consumer sentiment is behind NFTs? Is there this excitement around it from what we've seen from our data? Is there this clamor for NFTs in sort of the food service or the food space, or indeed in retail and e-commerce? Are we seeing those kind of patterns coming through from the consumer behavior as well?
We did poll consumers for my report, Evolutions in E-commerce. Now, this was back in September of 2021. Interest at that time certainly outweighed actual NFT purchases. So at that time, it was 19% of consumers actually owned one or more NFTs, and 80% had not owned NFTs. But interest in NFTs was certainly higher than that. We also took a look at some of the purchase drivers for NFTs. And at that time, more than half of people who had purchased NFTs were really there because they were curious about what it is and how it worked. And then falling secondary to that was a third of consumers who were interested to own or get access to something exclusive. Certainly, we're seeing that NFT ownership skews younger. Millennials were the most likely of all to have bought into NFTs at that time, but we're also seeing higher interest among Gen Z consumers as well. But definitely in terms of interest, like as many as 60% of millennials say they are interested in NFTs.
As far as the food service space, we have about 35% of people who are interested in NFTs are interested in the food service space. So I think that for me is a pretty high number.
I guess my big question as well is, without sort of being provocative or anything, but is this going to be a bubble? Is it going to be, there's all this curiosity, but is there going to be this investment and this bubble is going to burst, and NFTs in a couple of years' time are going to be a thing of the past? Or is it something that you do see now does have that evolution that has the staying power, essentially? I know we don't have a crystal ball, of course, but in your opinion, is this something where it's like a property investment bubble market kind of thing? Or is it something where actually, no, this does have staying power and there is going to be an evolution?
Well, certainly consumers still have a lot to learn about NFTs. So again, going back to that consumer research from Evolutions in E-commerce, nearly 40% of consumers say they didn't know enough about NFTs to know whether or not they wanted to buy one. So that certainly shows a lot of the opportunity in the space. And there's definitely a learning curve, particularly for older consumers. And this may be an area that, some older consumers just don't build that interest in, but definitely some room to grow in terms of learning how NFTs work and what they are. In terms of whether or not, in my opinion, if this is a bubble getting ready to burst, certainly there are some fluctuations in the NFT and the crypto market right now that make this particularly challenging. But I think this is really a course correction. So I do think some of the, early adopters who got into this space, I do think some of the assets were overvalued. So we are going to see a course correction there. But it's my prediction that this is really just a transition into the mainstream and that there's more opportunity to be had, and we'll definitely see more from NFTs in the future.
Yeah, I think the past month or two have kind of been a turning point as far as the crypto market being quite tumultuous. But I really do think the NFTs, they'll evolve, outside of digital collectibles. They'll continue to be tied to experiences. I can't see them going away. I can see, like Brittany said, though, just the value being just a little more leveled out, a level playing field, the hype settling down a little bit, and them just being more tied to experiential things.
That's almost a positive thing as well, isn't it? Right? When that leveling out comes, it almost solidifies it a little bit more, because rather than just being this hype thing where there's loads of investment, that maybe crazy figures going around to begin with, the value isn't truly known at that point. Whereas actually when it levels out, it probably does leave for probably a more sturdy field to play in. And actually then the evolution can continue. As we said before, when we talk about metaverses, we don't know what the limits are right now. We're still looking at it from 2022 goggles, I guess. So there are going to be these evolutions that come. So it's fascinating to think of that going forward. It's also really easy as well to knock. We say this all the time with new technology, right? But it's always really easy to knock it, right? Cryptocurrency and all kinds of blockchain go through the same thing. I guess what we haven't spoken about today would be the sustainability question. I mean, that's always leveled at this type of thing, is sort of just how environmentally friendly can these sort of technologies be? Is that something that you think, or is it something that you've come across at all, those kind of sustainability questions around NFT? Is that something consumers worry about? Is it something companies are worrying about? Is it something we should be worrying about? Or is this something maybe it's easy to focus on the negative rather than the positive?
There's certainly been a lot of pushback, especially with so many celebrities in this space, and their introduction into the NFT world will come with, people pushing back and saying, this is not sustainable. This is not environmentally friendly. You're using this for your own profit versus what it's actually doing. So a funny real world example, a friend of mine's an electrician, and I was talking to him about NFTs, and he's like, I have, a client that I'm going to be helping in his residence, and he mines cryptocurrency, and he needs 3 times the amount of energy in his residence because he's running these computers to mine crypto all day long. And so I asked him what that would be equivalent to, and he said running 10 large air conditioning units 24 hours a day, 7 days a week out of someone's house. So that's just a small world example. But now you have companies who are coming in and doing crypto mining. So that's, elevating to a whole new level.
Yeah, the energy consumption piece is definitely a consideration and a concern and a barrier, I think, to NFTs moving forward. Like Sydney, I had also read an article about one NFT called Space Cat. And this article noted that this NFT's carbon footprint is actually equivalent to an EU resident's electricity usage for 2 months. There was at one time a website that was reporting out the estimated greenhouse gas emissions associated with individual NFTs. It's since been taken down, but I think that goes to show sort of the overall environmental impact. However, there are people in this space who are working to make NFTs more sustainable. There's one NFT marketplace called Voice, for instance, which was launched in September of 2021. And its blockchain is said to be more eco-friendly and offers like carbon neutral minting, and just really trying to make the process more sustainable. There are other NFT creators who are trying to offset the carbon emissions by making investments and donations to sustainable organizations to reduce their carbon footprint in other areas as a way to offset the impact of NFT. So I think this, just like some of the other pieces that we're talking about, the regulatory aspect is something that is still evolving, but is a problem on people's radars to solve.
Do you think these are going to be big enough barriers to stop companies and consumers and everyone's getting involved in this space? Or do you think it's something that you sort of mentioned a few solutions there. Do you think it's something that is on its way to being sorted out? Is it something that should put brands off, for example, getting involved, that sustainable conversation? Can I be a sustainable brand and still play in this space?
I think like a lot of new technologies, at the beginning, you're going to be doing the fastest, most efficient in terms of being successful. So the beginning of crypto mining is who can have the most electricity flowing and pulling the most information as quickly as possible. And now that there's been pushback on that, I think that the space is, like Brittany said, ready to become more sustainable. There's going to be a response to this. And I think that companies and brands should obviously keep this in the back of their head, but I think we're working towards more sustainable options.
Yeah, I think it really speaks to the point that, brands and retailers really need to consider what their brand is and who their clientele is. And I think, if you're really a sustainable, eco-friendly retailer and that's, your mission, I don't know for those retailers right now if NFTs are the right space for them until there's some challenge on this, but certainly they should dissect that and figure out what's right for their brand. But I do think that there are some consumers and will continue to be some consumers who shy away from NFTs simply because of the sustainability aspect. However, I'm not sure how many consumers are actually aware actively of those sustainability challenges. So it's kind of a scale to balance there.
So if it's interesting, so it kind of as we keep saying, it is something that is going to keep evolving and keep playing with. But should brands or retailers or service providers, should they be getting involved in NFTs now? Then, as in your opinion, is it in what ways, what options are available to different retailers or brands or food service providers or things like that? Is there a way to make a good NFT experience for them to sort of maybe overcome some of the challenges, but also just to right now, what would you say the key things are to highlight to really appeal the most to consumers?
I think going off of Brittany's last point, the number one thing I would say is just know your clientele. What do they want? What are they going to be interested in? If you're releasing an NFT and your, main clientele are an older generation who doesn't show interest in this, maybe second guess that, or maybe look at something a little more basic to do. I would also say a really big thing is just to tie in the real world experiences. Things in food service that have seen success so far have been, restaurants that sell an NFT, and then you're able to go to a real world event, try the recipes that you saw in the metaverse, go into the metaverse, order something online. It comes to your doorstep.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the space. For retailers and brands specifically, tying that into tangible, physical, real world purchases is going to be a big key element when you look at, Nike's crypto kicks, when you look at some of the releases that retailers are putting out. K-Swiss is another sneaker brand, released an NFT tied to a limited edition release of their classic sneaker. So things like that are going to be really important for retailers and brands. But if you look at the entertainment space or the travel space, experiences and access to VIP events are really going to be a big piece of it. So it just comes back to really knowing what your brand is, who your clientele is, and determining what works for you. But I would say the biggest piece of advice or key takeaway for brands and retailers to consider is they don't have to figure all of this out themselves. It's really about outlining and finding the best partnerships. Nike acquired digital firm Artifact. Adidas partnered with Bored Ape Yacht Club for their NFT release. You've got retailers and brands all over hiring SVPs of the metaverse. So I think that's really key, is outlining those partnerships before you get started, so you know the space and know who you're working with.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be groundbreaking to begin with. Something like Dave & Buster's, they already have, space in the gaming world. They're a restaurant chain. So it makes sense for them to have an NFT that's tied, to your crypto wallet, and it's tied to the games you play when you're at Dave & Buster's, and you collect points that can be, part of a loyalty program. So you can kind of think of what you already have and how you can expand that kind of seamlessly into the metaverse and the NFT world.
You mentioned gaming there as well. That's a whole other thing that we haven't even discussed today, but I guess we could probably will have a whole other podcast about sort of the impacts that we can have through that. But it seems like we're definitely at the starter point with NFTs in terms of right now, maybe it's about collectibles. We do have the sustainability question and, people questioning about scams and celebrities and everyone jumping on board the sort of the bandwagon. But it does seem like there's a lot more to come from NFTs. And with regards to, I'm fascinated by this idea of authenticity. So could it become like a certificate of authenticity for a fashion item that you buy, or a fragrance or a beauty product or any kind of product? It's almost this digital authenticity certificate there. It's fascinating to see what is going to be possible going forward in this space.
Yeah, I certainly think we're at the very beginning of this.
Yeah, and in the luxury space, you're definitely seeing NFTs being used to authenticate things like, luxury watches and handbags, and even in the beverage space, luxury, high, fancy wine, whatever. I'm lacking the right term there, but you're really going to see that play out. And I think the metaverse too is going to really flip the script on NFTs considerably. And I've attended a couple of metaverse events. I went to the Metaverse Fashion Week on Decentraland platform, and all of the users there were really excited about the limited edition NFTs. That's really what was bringing them into the space. And so when that world gets built out, I think we'll see a lot more utility and consumer interest in NFTs to go along with it.
And that's where the excitement lies with these things as well, isn't it? Because I didn't even ask either of you at the start. Do either of you own an NFT, or maybe even more than one?
I do not.
Oh, okay. Brittany, do you own an NFT?
I do not own one yet, but I've been looking into purchasing one. It's one of those things that it's kind of like the personal aspect of it is just finding which NFT I actually want to buy. I will say our director of retail has a prediction that by the end of the year, most, significant amount of people actually own an NFT. And a lot of that really hinges on retailers and brands, I think, and that opportunity that they have to make them more accessible and partner them with your purchase. And like, that's kind of our point, is that the more they're available and hitting the mainstream, the more people will own them.
That's definitely a fact, because every time I go on to try and buy an NFT, I always miss the drop. It's like they're gone so quickly and they're just gone. So yeah, access is definitely the thing hindering me right now. Sorry, Sydney, I sort of interrupted you there.
Oh no, it's certainly strange to talk about a subject so often and not actually own it. I can't say that I have spoken so much about something that, wasn't in my real life. But I think that you need to find that balance between exclusivity and accessibility. And that's going to be the main thing that will move brands forward.
But that's where the big sort of the excitement, I think, is, because these technologies are exciting to see what are possible. There are, of course, challenges which we've discussed and mentioned today, but it is exciting to see. And there are these early adopters and enthusiasts as well that I think will power or motivate these movements forward. Because, you mentioned Decentraland earlier, Brittany. I went to a press launch in Decentraland, and it was exciting. It was fun. It was a bit clunky, I'll be honest, but it's because we're so used to seeing, Halo on the Xbox and all these amazing video games. We just think everything's going to be seamless and wonderful. But actually, they can be a bit clunky, but it's just the excitement of sort of being involved. As you mentioned earlier as well, Sydney, the experience becomes really important. So brands should probably tap into that a bit as well.
Absolutely. When you remember the early days of the internet, right? Those first websites that came out were clunky. And I kind of feel like that's where we are with the metaverse. Like, we haven't built out that space yet, but before you know it, this new digital realm will be something we use in our everyday lives, just at one point in the past when the internet was just an idea, and now look where we're at.
Yeah, I completely agree with that assessment. It's very exciting.
It is exciting. Well, it definitely seems, thank you both so much for your insights today. It definitely seems like exclusivity is going to be one thing that we're playing with right now. I like this idea of this changing ideal of ownership and value, and how NFTs really sort of motivate people in different ways because of that concept. So I think that's a really interesting thing to look at. But also this link to real life perks right now seems important, again, because going back to that idea of familiarity, the more people you can bring along with you, the better. And I think, although we like new things, we also, the nostalgia trend has proved to us we still like familiar things as well. So I think that's where NFTs right now are seeing the most success, especially from what the two of you have said, is this idea of linking to something tangible that we can relate to, that we can physically sort of conceive in our own minds. So that definitely seems to be something that we need to be looking at. There is obviously a lot more to be done. We've mentioned the challenges today with regards to sustainability and sort of people sort of jumping on the bandwagon and thing. But I think it's one of the key sort of areas, or the key takeaways I've had from today, is just this idea that there's still a lot to learn. I've learned so much in this conversation, so thank you both, but there is still so much to learn, and that's okay. This evolution is going to be okay. There's clearly curiosity from consumers. Brands are clearly curious as well, retailers, companies in general. So it seems like it's a really exciting space to look at, and definitely one that is worth investing in right now and seeing how that evolution continues. So that it kind of does it for today. Unfortunately, I think we probably filled the time. As I say, I have learned a lot today. If anyone would like to learn more about what we've discussed today or anything else, then you can go to the Mintel platform, either at mintel.com, or if you're a client, go to clients.mintel.com. Indeed, some of the reports that we've mentioned today from Brittany and indeed Sydney as well, you will find on that platform discussing NFTs a bit further. But I just wanted to thank you both for your input today. It really has been very insightful. And I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as well. So Brittany and Sydney, thank you very much both.
Thanks. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
As I say, thank you. The thanks is definitely to the two of you, but it's also to the listeners as well. Thank you very much for listening with us. As I say, more information, head over to mintel.com. Be sure as well to subscribe to Little Conversation wherever you get your podcasts. But all that's left for me to do is again to extend another thank you and say have a great day.